بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. Last night we left off in Nukhbat al-Fikar after having completed the 10 criticisms that a hadith may go through. So tonight, inshallah, we pick up where we left off. And we also discussed ulu al-nisbi and ulu al-mutlaq. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he then goes on to say, تشارك الراوي ومن روى عنه في السن واللقي فهو الأقران وإن روى كل منهما عن الآخر فالمدبج. If the narrator and the one from whom he narrates share the same age and having met, then this is called al-aqran. If each one of them narrates from the other, then it is al-mudabbaj. So now we're looking at two different narrators of hadith, and they're similar to each other. They're similar to each other in age, all right? And they may also be similar to one another in who they took from, they studied with. They have the same Shaykh, for example. All right. When one of them narrates from the other, yani a peer narrates from the other one, then this is called the riwayat al-aqran. Okay. One peer is narrating from the other, then this is called the riwayat al-aqran. And why is this important? Because the question is, why is someone of the same age narrating from his peer? This is not usually how the narration of a hadith goes. Usually you're narrating from an older person, a shaykh, an elder, a teacher. But in this case, you're narrating from someone who is a student just like you. You guys learned from the same shaykh. You guys are around the same age. Okay? But it's important to know this because this actually happens. And it's important to know that it's not a mistake, as it may seem apparently. Okay, a student of hadith is studying hadith and they come across someone narrating from another and they're of the same age, they took from the same shaykh. At first glance, it may seem like a mistake, but this actually occurs, all right? And there's reasons it may occur. For example, one student misses the class one day. So he has to narrate from his peer who was there in the class that day that he missed. Okay, so it does occur. Now, what happens, or what do we call it, when they both narrate from each other? Okay, so it's clear the first surah, the first scenario is where it's only one way. Student A narrates from student B. Now, what happens in the case where student A narrates from student B and student B also narrates from student A? This is another type of narration of aqran, but this one is called mudabbaj. Okay, this one is called mudabbaj. The first one is just one-way narration. The second is both ways. Okay, and this one is called mudabbaj. So every mudabbaj is the riwayah of aqran, but not the other way around. Okay, and not the other way around. He goes on to say, وَإِنْ رَوَى عَمَّنْ دُونَهُ فَالْأَكَابِرُ عَنِ الْأَصَاغِرِ وَمِنْهُ الْآبَاءُ عَنِ الْأَبْنَاءِ وَفِي عَكْسِهِ كَثْرَةٌ. If one narrates from someone below him, then it is the elders narrating from the juniors. So riwayat al-aqran or riwayat al-akabir an al-asaghir is what we're looking at here. The narration of the seniors from those who are junior. Okay, riwayat al-akabir an al-asaghir. And this is not just due to age. Okay, when we say the seniors narrating from the juniors, we're not only referring to age, but it may also be in status. It may be in knowledge. Okay, because someone can be senior to another person, yes, by age, but also due to the status and their knowledge. Okay, and the most famous example of this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he narrates from a Sahabi. Usually, it's a Sahabi narrating from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, but there is a scenario where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, al-akabir, that who is senior, is narrating from someone who's junior to him, meaning a companion, lesser than him in status, okay, and in knowledge. And this is the hadith that we find in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ, after he prayed, he turned around and he told everyone to stay in their place because he had something to tell them. What did he tell them? He said that a man just came to him by the name of Tamim ad-Dari. وحدثني حديثا وافق الذي كنت أحدثكم عن مسيح الدجال. And he came and he told me something that I used to tell you all, which agrees with what I used to say about Masih al-Dajjal. Then he told the whole story about how Tamim al-Dari got lost on an island and he came across Masih al-Dajjal, etc. Okay, so in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is narrating something that he heard from Tamim al-Dari. Okay, so this is called the riwayat al-akabir an al-asaghir. Okay, even though the usual manner, as we mentioned, is that the junior or the student is narrating from the one above him, whether that be the teacher or the father, for example, but this exists. All right, so the student of knowledge, especially the student of hadith, should not get confused and rush to point out a mistake. Okay, should not rush to point out a mistake. وَمِنْهُ مَنْ رَوَى عَنْ أَبِيهِ عَنْ جَدِّهِ. Included in this is the father narrating from the son. And the reverse is plentiful. The father narrating from the son. And the reverse is plentiful, meaning the son narrating from the father, adi. This is something that happens plenty. Okay? Why? Because if the father is a shaykh, then he's going to learn from the father. But what's not normal usually is that the father is narrating from the son. The father is narrating from the son. Okay? He says, among it is one who narrates from his father, from his grandfather. Okay? Included in the riwayah of akabir an al-aghir, the senior narrating from the junior, is when one reports from their father who also reports from the grandfather. Okay? And this is a normal occurrence, as we mentioned. And the most famous example of this is the chain of hadith Amr ibn Shu'ayb an abihi an jaddihi. Okay, Amr ibn Shu'ayb from his father, from the grandfather. There's a very famous chain of narration that you find in many of the books of hadith. Okay, another example of that is that Isnad Bahz ibn Hakim an abihi an jaddihi. Bahz from his father, from the grandfather. وإن اشترك اثنان عن شيخ وتقدم موت أحدهما فهو السابق واللاحق. If two narrators share a single shaykh and the death of one of them precedes the other, then this is called as-sabiq wal-lahiq, the earlier and the latter. To make it clear what this is referencing, let us give an example. Let's take a more modern day name. Okay, Shaykh bin Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala, he was born in the year 1910. All right, he was born in the year 1910. Let's say, for example, he began to teach when he was 20 years old. That would be which year? 1930. Sah? Stay with me. We're working with the dates here. Okay? Let's say he sat down in his chair and began to teach hadith at the age of 20, which is 1930. In his class is an old man, an elder, 90 years old. And he takes hadith from the young Shaykh bin Baz. The following year, that old man dies. What year is that? 1931. All right? So you have a student of Shaykh bin Baz, and that man was 91 years old. He died in 1931. Shaykh bin Baz goes on to live a long life. He dies in the year 1999. Okay? Before he passes away, there's a young student, 20 years old. He comes to Shaykh bin Baz in 1998, and he takes hadith from him. Then Shaykh bin Baz dies. This young student who was 20 when he took the hadith, he goes on to live a long life. Let's say he lived until the year or to the age of 70. So he was 20, sah, when he took the hadith. Then he lived 50 more years. Okay? So that means what? Now, Shaykh Ibn Baz, he passed away in 1999. This student, he lives on 50 more years. That's 2049. Sah? Okay. There are two students we're looking at here now. The first student died in the year 1931. The second one died in 2049. That's at least 90 years or 100 years difference. When you're looking at the books of hadith and you're looking at, for example, let's say Shaykh Ibn Baz's biography, and it mentions he has these two students. One died in 2049, the other died in 1931. It might jump out at you. You might be surprised. Well, this doesn't make sense. There's such a huge gap in between the two. But again, one shouldn't rush to think that it's a mistake. The first one was already old in age when he took the hadith, and he died at that time. The second one was young when he took the hadith at the final life or the final time of the Shaykh. And then he went on to live a long life. That gap is not usually normal, but it exists. What do we call this? We say the first student who passed away is as-sabiq, the earlier one. And the one who died later on is al-lahiq, the one that lived on. Okay? So this narration or this type of passing on a hadith or these students, they're called as-sabiq wal-lahiq. All right? Everyone understand? We good? Tamam. He says, وَإِنْ رَوَى عَنْ اثْنَانِ أو اثْنَيْنِ متفق الاسم ولم يتميز فباختصاصه بأحدهما يتبين المحمل. If one narrates from two people who share the same name and they are not distinguished, then by his specific association with one of them, the neglected one, which is called al-muhmal, becomes clarified. طيب, a student, he narrates, for example, from two different shuyukh. He has two different teachers. Both of those teachers have the same name. Okay, they have the same name. We have to find out and distinguish which teacher is this student talking about when he is passing on the hadith. If he doesn't clarify which one it is, how do we come to the conclusion that he's talking about this one and not this one? All right. For example, you have the Hamadain, the two Hammads, Hammad ibn Salama and Hammad ibn Zayd. Okay, and you have the two Sufyans, Sufyan al-Thawri and Sufyan ibn Uyayna. All right. When someone says Sufyan and he doesn't explain which one, then we call this muhmal. We call this muhmal. Okay, the one that's neglected. Yani his mention, who he is specifically, is neglected. This is called al-muhmal. All right. So how do we check this? Ibn Hajar, he says, we look at which one of those two shuyukh is this student known to associate with the most. Okay, which one of these two is the student known to associate with the most? And this is how we'll come to the conclusion. So for example, Imam Ahmad, when he reports hadith, and he says, I was told by Sufyan, and he leaves it there. He doesn't mention which Sufyan. The ulama of hadith, they say, this is in reference to Sufyan ibn Uyayna. How do we come to that conclusion? Imam Ahmad, when he was born, Sufyan al-Thawri, 3 years prior, passed away. Okay, Sufyan al-Thawri passes away 3 years before Imam Ahmad is born. So when he says Sufyan, it's in reference to which one? Ibn Uyayna. All right, so this is how we come to that conclusion. Another example is the example of Abu Salama at-Tabudhaki. All right, Abu Salama at-Tabudhaki. When he narrates from Hammad, he just says Hammad. He doesn't explain, is it Hammad ibn Zayd or is it Hammad ibn Salama? How do we come to the conclusion of who he's talking about? Well, we know that Abu Sulaiman at-Tabudhaki, he was very close with, and he spent the most years with Hammad ibn Salama. And when it comes to Hammad ibn Zayd, we know that he only took one hadith from him in his life. Okay, so when he says Hammad, is talking about Ibn Salama and not Ibn Zayd. All right? It's talking about Ibn Salama and not Ibn Zayd. وإن جهد مرويه جزما رده أو احتمالا قبل في الأصح وفيه من حدث ونسيه. If a narrator categorically denies what is attributed to him, it is rejected. But if he denies it as a possibility, it is accepted according to the soundest view. And included in this is the case of one who narrated and then forgot. Meaning here that when a student reports a hadith from a shaykh, what do we do now if this shaykh, he completely or outright rejects this narration and he says, I didn't narrate this. This is not my hadith. How do we move forward if the shaykh, he rejects this hadith? This is broken up into two scenarios as Ibn Hajar, he gives us here. Number one, either the shaykh is going to categorically deny this hadith. And he categorically denies it by the way he says it. For example, he says, Lam arwi hada. I did not narrate this. That's very clear. All right? Or he says, for example, kadhaba alayya. He lied on my name. If a shaykh categorically denies a hadith being from him, then do we accept his claim that it's not from him? Yes, we will accept it. We won't narrate the hadith from him. All right, we won't attribute it to him. And in this case, we say the student made a mistake. But what if the shaykh is unsure, does not outright reject the hadith? Rather, he says, I don't remember this, or something similar. Helpful. Ibn Hajar here, he says that we will accept the claim of the students. Okay, and that hadith is, this is in and of itself an entire field of, okay, and that's what he says at the end here, that this is called man haddatha wa nasiya. The field is called the one who reported and then forgot, the one who narrated and forgot. And there are books written on this subject matter, which they detail the various cases. وإن اتفق الرواة في صيغ الأداء أو غيرها من الحالات فهو المسلسل. If the narrators, they agree in the form of transmission or in other ways, then it is called al-musalsal. The musalsal hadith is a type of hadith which, just like any or every other hadith, it's in this case of one, it has a special quality to it. Okay, but in every other way, it's a hadith just like every other hadith. All right, it has a matan, it has a sanad, it has the chain of narration, it has the wording that it leads up to. All right. However, at times there's a special quality that the scholars of hadith, they look for in a hadith. Okay, any special quality that stands out. For example, if we were to come across a hadith where Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, he narrates from Imam al-Shafi'i, and Imam al-Shafi'i, he narrates from Imam Malik, and Imam Malik, he narrates from al-Nafi', etc. This is not a sanad just like any other sanad. Okay, here we're going to call this musalsal. Musalsal meaning it is a hadith which has some type of quality that is continuous throughout it. In this case, what is that special quality? That it is connected with huffaz, great memorizers, and fuqaha at the same time. Scholars of hadith and scholars of fiqh. Okay? So these are a type of quality that we look for in the hadith. All right? We gave one example. Let's give another example. Another example is where a hadith is musalsal according to a certain land. Where you look at the chain and you see that everyone in the chain is from the same land. Okay? A Kufan from another Kufan, from another Kufan, from another Kufan. The hadith stays in Kufa. Or someone from Yemen who's reporting from another person from Yemen, from Yemen, from Yemen. It stayed in that country. This is a special quality that the scholars, they look at and they point out. Okay, this type of quality is called musalsal. And musalsal, there are certain types which are very weak, and there are certain types which are very strong. The strongest of which, as the scholars they mention, is the musalsal hadith biqira'at surat al-Saf. Okay? Yani where each narrator, he recites the surah to the next, all the way until the end. Another one is a hadith or musalsal hadith, which is musalsal bid Dimashqiyin, where each narrator in the chain is from Dimashq, from Damascus. Another one is the musalsal bil Misriyin, where each narrator is from Egypt. And another one is the musalsal bil Muhammadiyin, where each narrator in the chain, his name is Muhammad. Okay, these ones exist and they're the strongest of the musalsal ahadith. Ibn Hajar now he's going to introduce us to some of the ways that a person passes on a hadith. Okay, what are you supposed to say when you pass on a hadith? It's going to depend on how you took the hadith to begin with. Okay, so how you took it will determine how you pass on the hadith. And here he's going to mention a few forms for us. He says, وَصِيغُ الْأَدَى سَمِعْتُ وَحَدَّثَنِي ثُمَّ أَخْبَرَنِي وَقَرَأْتُ عَلَيْهِ ثُمَّ قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنَا أَسْمَعُ ثُمَّ أَنْبَأَنِي ثُمَّ نَاوَلَنِي ثم شافهني ثم كتب إلي ثم عن ونحوها. The forms of transmission are: I heard, he narrated to me, then he informed me, I read to him, then it was read to him while I listened, then he reported to me, then he handed it to me, then he addressed me orally, then he wrote to me, then an, which means from, and the likes. And the ulama of hadith, they give a great attention to the way that a hadith is being transmitted. Okay? Why? Because at times the end ruling on the hadith would depend on it. Whether hadith is authentic or not, if the chain is broken or fully connected, at times relies on this, the way that the hadith was passed on. Okay? So they give us a great deal of attention to these forms of transmission. He says, فَالْأَوَّلَانِ, as for the first two, لمن سمع وحده من لفظ الشيخ فإن جمع فمع غيره وأولها أسرحها وأرفعها في الإملاء. The first two, which are the first two? سمعت and حدثني. Okay, سمعت and حدثني. These are the first two. He says here that these first two are for one who heard directly from the Shaykh's wording alone. He heard from the Shaykh's wording alone. Okay? سمعته and حدثني, when the person is alone with the Shaykh and he heard directly from the Shaykh. What happens if he's with a student and he hears from the Shaykh? Now he's no longer by himself, so he must use the plural form. He must say سمعنا or حدثنا. Okay? Use the plural form. Tamam? Pointing to the fact that he heard this from the Shaykh while he was with others. And these first two are the highest forms of transmitting a hadith. These first two are the highest forms of transmitting a hadith. Okay, because they denote the most explicit fashion of taking hadith from the Shaykh. والثالث والرابع لمن قرأ بنفسه فإن جمع فكالخامس. The third and fourth are for one who read himself. If you use the plural, then it is like the fifth. Okay, so we've taken the first two. The third and the fourth now are for the one who read himself. Okay, what is the third and the fourth? The third is أخبرني, and the fourth is قرأت عليه. Okay, so if you're sitting with the Shaykh, and the Shaykh is not the one dictating the hadith to you, rather you're reading to the Shaykh, then you may say أخبرني when you pass on the hadith. You may say قرأت عليه, I read to him, when you pass on the hadith. Okay. He also mentions here, if it is with someone else, yani someone else is with you, then again you use the plural form. أخبرنا. Okay, أخبرنا. All right. Or قرئ عليه وأنا أسمع. Yani the student was reading to him while I was listening. Okay. And this is an often used form of transmission by Imam al-Nasa'i. Tamam? when it comes to his teacher, Al-Harith ibn Miskin. Imam al-Nasa'i, while he was seeking knowledge, he went to Egypt. And Imam al-Nasa'i, for those who don't know, was a very well-off sheikh. And he had money. And he used to dress very well. When he came to Egypt, he went to seek out the Shaykh al-Harith ibn Miskin. And al-Harith ibn Miskin at the time, he had some issues with the ruler of Egypt. All right, he was having some difficulties. And he was very paranoid when it came to his classes that the governor or the leader of his town would be sending uyun, spies, to his class. One day walks in some new student. He never recognizes him. He's never seen him before. And this guy is dressed very nice. This is al-Nasa'i. Okay, but he's not known too well at the time. And he sits down in the class, but Al-Harith ibn Miskin doesn't allow him. He kicks him out. I don't know you. You look suspicious. You gotta go. Imam al-Nasa'i, what does he do? He just goes outside. He sits against the wall of the class, and he continues listening to the ahadith being dictated. When he goes on to pass on the hadith, he does it in this fashion. He says in his sunan, you can open up the book and see where he says, قُرِيَ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنَا أَسْمَعُ. It was being recited to him and I heard. And so he passes on the hadith in this fashion. Okay? So this is how you can use these forms. وَالْإِنْبَاءُ بِمَعْنَى الْإِخْبَارِ. إنباء, يعني أنبأنا, takes the meaning as إخبار, يعني أخبرنا. Okay? أنبأنا and أخبرنا take the same meaning as he says here. إلا في عرف المتأخرين فهو للإجازة كعن. Except when it's used amongst the later scholars. Meaning, according to the earlier scholars, the mutaqaddimin, when they say أنبأنا, it's the same thing as saying أخبرنا. Same thing. Okay? But the later scholars, they make a differentiation here. They say أنبأنا is like an, okay, like an instead. تمام. وعنعنة المعاصر محمولة على السماع إلا من مدلس وقيل يشترط ثبوت لقائهما ولو مرة وهو المختار. Now we look at the an'ana hadith. Okay, he says the an'ana of contemporaries. We will rule it as being connected, as being heard, except when it comes from a mudallis. And it is said that establishing that the two met even once is required. And this is the preferred view. Tamam. What is an'ana? What is he talking about here when he says an'ana? It is that hadith in which the reporters, they're passing on the hadith by using the phrase an, from so-and-so. Okay? And this is one phrase of transmission or form of transmission that the scholars paid very, very close attention to. Okay? The majority of the ahadith that we have are passed on using this phrase. Okay? An fulan, an fulan. It can be sahih, it can be hasan, it can be da'if. It can be marfu', it can be mawquf, it can be maqtu'. Okay? What we are looking at here is the word that's being used to pass on the hadith. All right? طيب. What we're looking at here, more specifically, is what's called the an'ana of the mu'asir. The an'ana of two contemporaries. Okay? People who lived at the same time. This is what we're looking at here. If someone uses an when passing on a hadith and they didn't live at the same time, is this really an issue? It's an issue, but why is it not really an issue? It's clear. Okay, clear. Where it gets tricky is when this person is saying from so-and-so and they are contemporary. Okay, because the phrase an to begin with does not denote explicitly hearing it from the person. It could be that he did take it from the person directly, but it could also be that he didn't take it from them. Okay? For example, a person now can go to Masjid al-Nabawi, let's say, and they walk in, a class has just finished. And the Shaykh is Abdullahi al-Badr. He got up and he's walking out. Okay? And you walk up to him and you shake his hand and you go separate ways. You guys are contemporaries, صح? You met him, yes? طيب. Now if you go on to say An Shaykh Abdurazak, is it a connected chain? No, because you didn't hear anything from him. But the student that was there in the class who did hear the hadith from him, if he goes on to say An Shaykh Abdurazak, is it connected? Yes. So the An can be used in both ways. Okay, it's very daqiq. We have to be very careful here. All right. And so the ulama of hadith, they paid very close attention when it came to the an'ana of the mu'asib. I'll give you an example. When it comes to the tabi'i, Ibrahim ibn Yazid al-Nakha'i, he narrates from Aisha radiallahu anha, and he uses the phrase an. When you look at his biography, the ulama of hadith, they mention أنه دخل على عائشة. He visited Aisha before in her home. He saw her. He met her. Now he's narrating hadith from her. And even so, they say the chain is broken. There is no connection there. How? Because when they study it closely, they find that when he visited her in her home, he was a little boy. He wasn't even at the age where he could take hadith from. Yani he was visiting with the women folk of his family, his mother, his sister, his aunties. They were visiting Aisha, so he was with them because he was a child. All right. In this case, it's broken. Okay. Or for example, when it comes to Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, the ulama, they say that he saw Anas ibn Malik, but he never heard hadith from him. So if you find him narrating hadith saying an Anas, know that it is what? Broken or connected? Broken. All right. So this is why the concept of an'ana of the contemporaries is very important. Okay? Because we need to know if in this case it's a connected chain or if it's not a connected chain. Here, Ibn Hajar, what does he say to us? He says that the an'ana of the contemporaries, we're going to rule upon it as if it is established, it is connected. Except in the case where it's coming from what? Someone who does what? The mudallis, the one that does tadlis. He's covering who he took the hadith from. If we know this person is a mudallis, and now he's saying an so and so, in this case we don't take it from him, according to Ibn Hajar. But if we don't know this person to commit tadlis, concealment, then we're going to take the hadith from him when he uses an as fully connected. All right. He says that some of the scholars, they made a condition even with that. Even in the case where we do take it, there's a condition. All right. And no doubt there's a difference of opinion in this. So we'll mention what those difference of opinions are. The first group of scholars, they say, yes, we'll take it from him when he uses an. He's not a mudallis, we'll take it from him. But it must be proven that these two met at least once. At least once they met. All right? And this is the madhab of Imam al-Bukhari. This is the madhab of Imam al-Bukhari. And this is what makes Sahih al-Bukhari such a strong book. Because even though many or most of the ahadith are coming with an, it's proven that each one of those narrators met at least once. Okay? The second view is that being contemporaries and there being a strong possibility of having met is enough. There being a strong possibility of them having met is enough. All right? And this is the view of Imam Muslim. And this is the view of Imam Muslim. And Imam Muslim, in the introduction to his Sahih, spoke lengthy about this particular issue. And he was very strict upon the one who took the first view. Okay? Saying that the one who took this first view that they must have met at least once, and stipulating that as a condition for it being valid, has come with an innovation, he says. Some of the scholars, they say he's talking about his own teacher, al-Bukhari. Allah knows best. All right. But these are the various views. Ibn Hajar, which view does he take here? He says, وَقِيلَ يُشْتَرَطُ ثُبُوتِ لِقَائِهِمَا وَلَوْ مَرَّ وَهُوَ الْمُخْتَارِ. He takes the first view, that they must have met at least once. Okay. تمام. Then he goes on to say, وأطلق المشافهة في الإجازة كالمتلف بها والمكاتبة في الإجازة المكتوب بها واشترط المناولة اقترانها بالإذن بالرواية وهي أرفع أنواع الإجازة. They use the term mushafaha for an orally expressed ijaza. Okay, these are, now we're looking at the forms of permission, the forms of authorization, what we call ijaza. There are various types. The first one is what we call mushafaha. Okay, this is a orally expressed permission. All right, where the Shaykh, he says, I give you permission to narrate this from me orally. Okay, when passing it on, the student, he's going to say what? Shafahani. He's going to use the word shafahani. And this is the ijaza, which is verbal. The next type, he says, is al-mukataba. Al-mukataba. Okay, and this is when it's a written ijaza, a written authorization or permission. And when passing it on, the student is going to say kataba ilayya. He wrote to me. Kataba ilayya. And the third one here is called al-munawala. Al-munawala. And when passing on the hadith, a student says nawalani. Nawalani, he handed to me. Okay? Why? Because in this case, munawala is when the shaykh is handing a book to the student, a book of hadith, and giving him permission to narrate that. Okay? And a permission must be given in order for him to narrate that book. Ibn Hajar here, he says that idhn is required, a permission is required, even with that one. Okay? So you have the verbal ijaza, I give you permission. You have the written ijaza, where he writes that he's given you permission. And then you have a case where the shaykh is giving you a book of hadith. But you can't narrate that book of hadith unless you have permission, ijaza. All right? And that third one is called munawala.
So then in this case, even if the student heard the hadith from the shaykh, you can't actually use the shaykh in a chain.
When it comes to the book, because he didn't hear this book from the shaykh. He didn't hear these ahadith from him. Okay? So the shaykh giving him the book doesn't mean anything. It could just be a gift, right? But he didn't give him any permission to recite it. But when it comes to, for example, the classes of hadith, then the default is that you are already given it. All right? But in this case, he's being handed over a book. For what? He doesn't know. He has to get permission in order for him to pass it on. فهمت؟ تمام. وكذا اشترطوا الإذن في الوجادة والوصية بالكتاب وفي الإعلام وإلا فلا عبرة بذلك كالإجازة العامة وللمجهول وللمعدوم على الأصح في جميع ذلك. Likewise, they stipulated permission in wujada. This is another area where you require permission. Okay, there's another area where you require an ijaza, a permission. It is in bequeathing a book. Okay, if a person, for example, now he doesn't take that book from the shaykh directly, rather he finds the book. Okay, he's in a library, he finds a book, and it's written by a shaykh. And that shaykh is alive during his time. Can he just go on now to teach and report the ahadith in that book? No. He requires a idhn still. He still requires a permission. Okay, so that one is called wijada, where you find a book. Or for example, you find a book and it has a stamp in it. And you know that stamp is from this particular shaykh. You need the permission from the shaykh first. Or it has the signature of the shaykh. You still require permission to pass on those ahadith from his book. All right? He says, and in what's called al-wasiyya bil-kitab wa fil-i'lam. Okay? Fil-i'lam, yani when a Shaykh, he gives a general ijaza, okay? Or this is when a Shaykh, he narrates a book to the student, of one, then he says, I am narrating this kitab from so and so. Yani you're sitting with the Shaykh, and he says, this book, I narrated from so and so. What does that mean? Can I now go on and give this hadith to other people, Shaykh? He must give you what first? A permission, an authorization to do so. Okay? طيب. In here, he also mentions ijaza amma, a general ijaza. You have a Shaykh sitting up here and he says, I give everyone ijaza, just like that. And everything that I've ever learned and everything I've ever passed out, every hadith I've ever taken from my teacher, I give you ijaza. And ijaza lil majhul. I give ijaza to Abdullah. طيب, man Abdullah? Who? He must clarify. Okay, these are different forms of ijaza as well. And another one that he mentions here is lil ma'adum, the one who is not even there. For example, a sister is pregnant, and he says, I give ijaza to the one who's not born yet. All these last three, the ijaza to the one who's not there, and the ijaza to the one he mentions in an obscure way, or the ijaza that is just general for everyone in San Diego. These ones mean nothing. Ibn Hajar, he says. Okay? They have no standing, they bear no weight. All right? Even though they exist. All right? ثم الرواة إن اتفقت أسماؤهم وأسماء آبائهم فصاعدا واختلفت أشخاصهم فهو المتفق والمفترق وإن اتفقت الأسماء خطا واختلفت نطقا فهو المؤتلف والمختلف. Now we're looking at the narrators and how to tell them apart. Okay? He says, if the narrators, their names and their father's names and upward are the same, while who they actually are different, then this is called muttafiq wal muftariq. Muttafiq meaning the names are the same, but muftariq meaning that they are actually different people. Okay, don't get confused. It's not one person we're talking about. They're different people. All right. So, for example, you come across someone named Bashir, and his father's name is Muhammad. Then you come across another person, his name is Bashir, and his father's name is Muhammad. The names are the same, but they are two different people. The study of this is called muttafiq wal muftariq. Okay, muttafiq wal muftariq. Likewise, when the spelling of their names are the same, the spelling of their names are the same and they have the same names. Naam, Bushair or Bashir ibn Muhammad, but knowing that they are two different people, this is called muttafiq wal muftariq. All right. He says, when اتفقت الأسماء واختلفت الآباء أو بالعكس, if the names agree while the fathers are different now. So the first names are the same, but the fathers' names are different. For example, Muhammad ibn Aqil and Muhammad ibn Uqayl. Both are Muhammad, but the fathers are different. Okay, the fathers are different. فهو المتشابه. That is called متشابه. Okay, that is called متشابه. وكذا إن وقع الاتفاق في الاسم واسم الأب. Likewise, if there's agreement in the name and the father's name, but difference in lineage. Okay, واختلاف في النسبة. So for example, Muhammad ibn Abdullah Mukharrimi, and you have Muhammad ibn Abdullah al-Makhrami. Both are Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Their names and their father's names are the same. But the nisbah, who they're attributed to or where they're attributed to, whether it's a land or a tribe, are different. Okay? He says, وَيَتَرَكَّبُ مِنْهُ وَمِمَّا قَبَلَهُ أَنْوَاعُ. From this and what has preceded arise various types. Yani, this is various categories and types which come from this. منها أن يحصل الاتفاق أو الاشتباه إلا في حرف أو حرفين أو بالتقديم والتأخير أو نحو ذلك. He says, from this and what has preceded arise various types, such as an agreement or difference except in one or two letters, or by reversal of order and the like. Okay. For example, there are other ways that the differences and the similarities may occur in the names, in harf and in order. Okay. For example, Abdullah ibn Yazid, and you have Abdullah ibn Zayd. One letter is off. Okay, one letter difference. All right. And the order of the names may be pushed back. Ta'khir and taqdeem. An example of that is Aswad ibn Yazid. And then you have another narrator by the name of Yazid ibn Aswad. Or Anas ibn Malik and Malik ibn Anas. All right. All of these are important to know. Why? So you know that there's no mistake occurring in the actual chain. Meaning you must know these narrators and know who they are and their biographies, who they took from, etc. What times they lived at, when they died, and so on and so forth. All right? Khatima, conclusion. وَمِنَ الْمُهِمْ, among the important matters, مَعْرِفَةُ طَبَقَاتِ الرُّوَاةِ وَمَوَالِيدِهِمْ, is to know the generations or the classification of the narrators and their births, وَوَلَيَاتِهِمْ, and their death dates, وَبُلْدَانِهِمْ, and their lands, وَأَهْوَالِهِمْ تَعْدِيلًا تَجْرِيحًا وَجَهَالًا, and to know their conditions, whether they've been praised or they've been criticized, and whether or not they're unknown. Okay? And this is extremely important for a scholar or a student of hadith to know. Okay? Sure, there are people who memorized many ahadith. Okay? They have a great hifd. However, not everyone knows these details. The birth and the death date of the narrator, what lands they lived in and what lands they traveled to and entered, which sheikh they took from, who their students are, etc., etc. Okay? Only the experts and the specialists know this. Anyone can memorize a hadith, but not everyone knows all these details. And knowing these details, again, safeguard you from seeing a hadith as a mistake or being able to point out a mistake. Okay? ومراتب الجرح وأسوأها الوصف بأفعال كأكذب الناس ثم الدجال ثم وضاع أو كذاب وأسهلها لين أو سيء الحفظ أو فيه مقال. Now we look at the levels of criticism. A narrator is criticized. طيب, what are they being criticized with? What form is being used by this scholar of hadith who's grading them? Okay, he says the levels of criticism, the worst is description with the wazn or the template of af'al. Okay, af'al, which points to the most extreme of something. All right, in the Arabic language, such as كَأَكْذَبِ النَّاسِ, the greatest liar of the people, not just a liar, but كَأَكْذَبِ النَّاسِ. All right, so the worst jarh, the worst type of critiquing or criticizing a narrator is when the af'ala is used, that scale, okay, to describe the person. All right, and Ibn Hajar here, he gives us a few. He's going to give us the bad first, then the good. Okay, the bad first, then the good. The first one he gives us is akdhab nas, the greatest of the people in lying. The second one he says ad-dajjal, and when someone calls this narrator dajjal, okay, that's an extreme form of lying also. Okay, another one is called wadda', a fabricator. And the fourth one he says kadhab, an excessive liar. Okay, so this is from the worst to the least worst. After kadhab, he says, then there are the lighter forms still, which are negative criticism. The first one is layyin, meaning there's a light criticism on him. He's weak. Okay. The next one after that is sayyul hifz. He has weak memory. And then the last one is fihi maqal. They have discussed him. They've talked about him a little bit. Okay. So that's the lightest form of jarh. Whereas the top form of jarh or criticism is when you use the sigha af'al. such as أكذب الناس. All right, and this, it all comes back to how strict the scholar of hadith is. Okay, which leads us to uh, say what? That not all of the scholars of hadith that judge the narrators are the same when it comes to judging the narrator. People are different. Some people see things more strictly, and others see things a bit more lenient. And for that reason, the scholars have categorized the ulama of jarh wa ta'dil into three categories. Okay, into three categories. The first category are those who are balanced, al-muta'addilin, those who are fair and balanced when it comes to criticizing people. They don't go overboard, and they're also not too lenient. Okay, they're fair. And in this category, you have the likes of Imam Ahmad and also Imam uh, Abu Dawud and also Bukhari and also Ibn Abdul Barr and others. Okay, these types of scholars, when you see them talking about someone, they're usually being fair and balanced. Then you have another category of scholars, and these are the very strict ones, al-mutashaddidin. They may go overboard sometimes. Okay, and in that category are the likes of Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Qattan, and Yahya ibn Ma'in, and Abu Hatim al-Razi, and others. All right. Then you have the third category, which are those who are lenient, al-mutasahilin. And in this category, you have Ibn Hibban, and you have al-Hakim, and you have al-Bayhaqi, and you have al-Tabari, and others. All right. Out of all of these, the most harsh in his words, and because we're still talking about al-jarh here, criticizing, the most harshest is probably Yahya ibn Ma'in when it comes to critiquing narrators. He has no problem calling someone a kadhab. Rather, he has no problem calling someone a dajjal. Okay? He is the most strict. And that is why when the narrators of hadith would be around Yahya ibn Ma'in, they'd be terrified. Because you make one mistake, you slip up, all your narrations might go in the trash bin. Okay? So he was very strict. He once said about one narrator, and when I was in one of the books of Jarh wa Ta'dil, I found that he said about someone, huwa halal dam. This man his blood is halal. Why? Because why are you to all of these weak ahadith always? What's going on with you? He would say, for example, if I had a sword and a spear, لَغَزَوْتُهُ, I would wage war on this guy. And the likes of this. All right, so he would not shy away from critiquing someone. And la shak, he was the most strict. He says, وَمَرَاتِبُ التَّعْدِيلِ. Now he gives us the types or the levels of praising someone. Okay, the complete opposite now. He says, وَأَرْفَعُهَا الْوَصْفُ بِالْأَفْعَالِ. Okay, بِأَفْعَالِ. كَأَوْثَقِ النَّاسِ. The levels of accreditation, the highest is the description also with af'al. That wazn, that template in the Arabic language where it points to the most extreme of something. Okay, the extremes can be good or bad. So when someone says, أَوْثَقِ النَّاسِ, the most reliable, the most trustworthy person, this is the highest form of praising someone. All right? He says, ثُمَّ مَا تَأَكَّدَ بِصِفَةٍ أَوْ صِفَتَيْنِ كَثِقَةٍ ثِقَةٍ. Or that which is emphasized with one or two attributes. Meaning, you say this person is thiqatun thiqa. He's not just thiqa, he's not just strong or trustworthy, he's thiqatun thiqa. Okay, where you use two, or use it back to back, or two attributes. Okay, or thiqatun hafidh. He's thiqa and hafidh. Okay, two descriptions are being used there. Then he says, أو ثقة حافظ وأدناها ما أشعر بالقرب من أسحل التجريح كشيخ وتقبل التزكية من عارف بأسبابها ولو من واحد على الأصح. The lowest is what suggests closeness to the mildest criticism, such as Shaykh. All right, so what are the best forms? First, that which uses af'al, أوثق الناس. Then comes that which has two descriptions. thiqatun thiqa, or thiqatun hafiz. Then what comes after that? The lowest form of praise that a narrator can receive is to be called a shaykh. And that is the highest form that we have today, where you call someone a shaykh, mashallah, he's big. But the lowest form back then is to be called a shaykh. All right. A question is asked here now, and that is, do we accept the accreditation from a single scholar? From a single scholar, if that scholar is the only one who's accrediting this narrator. Okay, you come across a narrator, you only find one person accrediting him. Do we accept that accreditation even though that's all the tazkiyah that this narrator he has? Ibn Hajar, he says here, yes, we do accept it, but with one condition. Okay, what is that condition? That this scholar who's doing the accreditation, that he is someone who knows why he's giving that accreditation. And he's someone who's familiar with the science. Okay? He's not giving the accreditation because that's his buddy. La, he knows that this person is actually strong in hadith. Okay? So as long as the person, the scholar, is at the level where he knows the science and knows who he should accredit and who he shouldn't, then we can accept it from him, even if he's the only one who accredited that narrator. Okay? والجرح مقدم على التعديل إن صدر مبينا من عارف بأسبابه فإن خلى عن التعديل قبل مجملا على المختار. Criticism is given precedence over accreditation if it issues with clarification from one, if it's issued with clarification from one knowledgeable of its causes. The question here now is, you have a narrator. He's accredited and he's also criticized. What do we do in this scenario? Do we accept the praise, the accreditation of the scholar, or do we accept the criticism and the jarh of the other scholar? How do we approach this? This is what he's talking about here. All right. Ibn Hajar, he says, if this accreditation, okay, it's coming without any clarification, okay, without any clarification. Yani someone is just saying he's strong, but he's not mentioning the asbab, the reasons why he's strong. And this person, afwan, if this person is being criticized and he's being criticized with reason, he's being criticized with reason, but he also has ta'adil, an accreditation, then where do we go? We go with the criticism. Why? Because this criticism is coming from a scholar, and the scholar saying because of X, Y, and Z, we are critiquing him. Okay, there's reasons for it, so we give precedence to the critique. Okay, and that as a result. Okay, the praise is a general thing. It's just, as he says, mujmal. But the critique comes with reasons, so we take that. Okay, we come with what the criticism. فصل. He says, ومن المهم معرفة كنى المسمين وأسماء المكنين ومن اسمه كنيته ومن اختلف في كنيته ومن كثر كناه أو نعوته ومن وافقت كنيته اسم أبيه أو بالعكس أو كنيته كنية زوجته ومن نسب إلى غير أبيه أو إلى غير ما يسبق إلى الفهم ومن اتفق اسمه واسم أبيه وجده واسم شيخه وشيخ شيخه فصاعدا ومن اتفق اسم شيخه والراوي عنه. He mentions quite a few here when it comes to the names of the narrators or how the narrators are being referred to. Okay, let's take each one. The first one, he says, among the important matters to know is the kunyas of those who are named. The kunya meaning like Abu so-and-so or so-and-so. To know those kunyas of the person who is being named. Okay, so for example, we have Ahmed ibn Hanbal. We must know his kunya. Okay, knowing this stuff in the science is very important. What's his kunya? Abu Abdullah. Okay, the other one is, he says, and the names of those who are known by kunyas, meaning the opposite. This person is known by his kunya, but we must also know his name. Okay, for example, uh, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, that's his kunya, that's his actual name, right? The actual name is Abdullah. Okay, so we need to know the name of those people who are known by their kunyas as well. Okay, or whose name is his kunya. Whose name is his kunya. For example, Ahmed Abu Ahmed. Okay, Ahmed Abu Ahmed. We need to know who he is. All right, or those who they differed over regarding their kunya. Some people, when you find in their biographies that there's a difference of opinion as to what his kunya is. Some scholars, they say, for example, he is Abu Bakr. Another says he is Abu Muhammad. Someone says, no, he's Abu Ahmed. Okay, so we need to know who this person is at the end of the day as well. And those with many kunyas, you need to be familiar with one who has multiple kunyas. Okay, where there's no difference of opinion, he actually has multiple kunyas. So we need to know who he is and not get confused and think that this is one person and this is another person. Or those whose kunyas match their father's names. Okay, for example, Abu Ishaq, Ibn Ishaq, and Ishaq ibn Abi Ishaq. Okay, so his kunya, it matches the father's name. Or whose kunya is that of his wife. What's an example of that? Yani the wife and the husband both go by the kunya. Salama and Abu Salama. Sah? Or Darda and Abu Darda. Okay, we need to know who these people are as well. And those who are attributed to other than their fathers. Why? Because the asl, the default, is that you're attributed to your father. But there are those who are attributed to other than their father as well. All right. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah is not the father of Taymiyyah, right? Taymiyyah is his great grandmother. His actual name is Ahmed ibn Abdul Halim. His father's name is Abdul Halim. Okay, so we need to know who these people are. Or for example, Ismail ibn Ulayya, who was very frequently found in hadith. Ulayya is his mother, not his father. His father's name is Miksam. Okay, so we need to know all of these details as well. The student of hadith, or whose sheikh's name agrees with the name of his sheikh and onward. Okay, so for example, their sheikh, you have for example Sulaiman al-Tabarani. His sheikh's name is Sulaiman al-Wasiti, and his sheikh is named Sulaiman al-Dimashqi. Okay, so again, we don't get confused. These are different people. And those whose sheikh shares the same name as the one narrating from him, meaning there's a narrator. His student and his sheikh have the same name. Okay, the one on the opposite sides. I'm the narrator, my student and my sheikh, they both have the same name. So Bukhari, he has a student by the name of Muslim ibn Ibrahim al-Fardisi. And his teacher is called, his teacher is Muhammad al-Fardisi, whereas his student is Muslim ibn al-Hajjaj. Both their names are Muslim. All right, both of their names are Muslim. ومعرفة الأسماء المجردة والمفردة والكنى والألقاب والأنصاب وتقع إلى القبائل والأوطان بلادا أو ضياعا أو سككا أو مجاورة وإلى الصناع والحرفة ويقع فيها الاتفاق والاشتباه كالأسماء وقد تقع الألقابا. Also knowing the singular names, yani someone comes with the name Abdullah with no last name. We need to know who that is. Or someone comes with an uncommon name. Okay, Musaddad ibn Musarhad. It's very uncommon. Or someone comes with a kunya, right? Someone comes with a title. Someone comes with a lineage, which is related to a tribe or to a homeland or to a country or to a village or to the streets that he's from or to the neighborhood he's from. All of these are mentioned in the biographical evaluation books. Also to professions and crafts. Yani someone is known by the work that he does. Okay? Known by the work that he does. For example, the baker. Right? Or the one who sews, etc. Okay? We need to know who these people are. And this agreement, yani between names and confusion occur as well as in the titles, not just in the names, but the titles, the way that people are addressed. ومعرفة أسباب ذلك ومعرفة الموالي من أعلى ومن أسفل بالرق أو بالحلف ومعرفة الإخوة والأخوات, and knowing the reasons for these differences, knowing the clients, the mawali, okay, meaning what? Someone is freed from slavery. Someone is freed from slavery. So they are usually associated with the person that they were freed by, okay, that they were freed by. We need to know this connection between the two also. Okay, he says from above or below, by slavery or alliance, and knowing brothers and sisters. Okay, so it's necessary to tell these people apart. When it comes to brothers and sisters, this example is plentiful as well. For example, you have in the hadith tradition, Ubaidullah ibn Umar. Okay, Ubaidullah ibn Umar. And you have his brother Abdullah ibn Umar. Okay, Ubaidullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn Umar. Ubaidullah is the elder of the two. Okay, and he is by consensus a strong narrator. Ubaidullah is a strong narrator. But his brother Abdullah is a weak narrator. So we need to know this difference, because if it comes in a hadith, we need to know which one is being referenced and how to approach that narration, whether we're going to authenticate it or weaken it. Okay, he says, وَمَعْرِفَةُ آدَابِ الشَّيْخِ وَالطَّالِبِ, and to know the etiquettes of the shaykh and the student, meaning both the hadith scholar and the hadith student has certain etiquettes and mannerisms that he needs to uphold. And there are plenty that the scholars of hadith they mention. However, the most important of which, la shak, is for a student and the shaykh to practice and to exercise having the correct intention when it comes to hadith, seeking it and searching it, teaching it, reporting it, and taking it from a shaykh. Okay? The most important thing is that they struggle and strive to make their niyyah purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not that I'm going to memorize so many ahadith and take from so many shuyukh, that way I can brag later on. That is the most important type of adab that he must contain. وَسِنْ التَّحَمُّلْ وَالْأَدَاء, and he must know the age of receiving hadith and transmitting it. To know as well. All right, the age of taking hadith, and to know the age of taking hadith and listening to it. The scholars they mention that the correct, and they mention many ages, but what's correct at the end of the day is that when a person reaches the age of tamyiz, they can now sit and listen to hadith. And by tamyiz we mean they reach a level or an age of development where they now have discernment. They know between right and wrong, good and bad. Okay, so if someone's, for example, 5 years old, 6 years old, 7 years old, we say he can sit in the class and he can listen to hadith, no problem. Okay, that doesn't mean he can pass on hadith. Okay, he can only take it and listen to it. Like, when does he go on to pass on the hadith? He is allowed at the age once he hits puberty, and once he's baligh. Now, does that mean that's when he has to narrate hadith? No, he might not be ready still. He may still have a long way to go to complete his studies. But for argument's sake, let's say someone, he memorized hadith, he memorized the Quran, he knows the Arabic language in and out, he knows usul al-fiqh, he knows everything he needs to know, and he's 15. Can he now sit and narrate hadith? Yes, as long as he has reached the age of puberty, okay, as long as he's baligh. But we really don't find this happening. All right, we really don't find this happening, especially when you have major scholars living at the same time. So they would usually make that person wait until he himself grew up. All right, he says, وَصِفَةِ كِتَابَةِ الْحَدِيثِ وَعَرْضِهِ, and the manner of writing hadith and presenting it. For example, that you make sure you write, when you're writing hadith, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and not just sab, taking a shortcut, right? Or PBUH, peace be upon him. You write it out. Peace be upon him. Okay. He says, وسماعه وإسماعه والرحلة فيه وتصنيفه إما على المسانيد أو على الأبواب أو العلل أو الأطراف. And he must also know how to hear hadith and how and having it heard, traveling for it and compiling it either according to musnads, abwab, defects, or atraf. Okay, what does he mean here? He must know how to sit down properly with the correct manners, adab, in front of a sheikh, and listen and take the hadith. Okay, quiet, writing, when to listen, when it's okay to write, etc. Okay, and how to travel for hadith, meaning who he should travel to first, then who to delay traveling to, etc. All right, and how to compile hadith, because compiling hadith is not just done in one manner. There are different books written in various ways according to the hadith. For example, you have masanid, as he mentions here, the musnad compilation. You have the musnad of Imam Ahmad. Okay, this is a musnad book. What makes it musnad? What does it mean that it's musnad? All of the hadith, if you're to open up the book, you'll find that this is the chapter of Abu Bakr. All the hadith of Abu Bakr are in one chapter. Then it's the hadith of Umar. Then the hadith of Uthman. Then the hadith of Ali, and so on and so forth. They're organized according to the Sahabi. This is called musnad. All right. Then you have the books of abwab. Here, what he means by abwab is the abwab al-fiqh. Okay, the books of hadith, which are categorized according to jurisprudence, fiqh. You have the chapter of tahara and the ahadith related to it, the chapter of zakat and the ahadith related to it, the chapter of salah and the ahadith related to it, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then you have the books of ilal, of defects, meaning a scholar, he compiles ahadith that have the hidden defects in it. Okay, his purpose is not to gather together and compile ahadith which are authentic, for example. No, it's to gather the defected ahadith. And the books of atraf. Okay, atraf meaning the corner of something. So what's meant here? There are certain books which are compiled in the form of an index, where only the beginning of a hadith is mentioned. You look up the hadith, you find the beginning of it, and then that tells you where to find the hadith in an original source. Okay, it's just indexing. So you use that book to find the hadith in the original source. Okay, and these books have all been written. He says, وَمَعْرِفَةُ سَبَبِ الْحَدِيثِ وَقَدْ صَنَّفَ فِيهِ بَعْدُ الشُّيُوخِ الْقَاضِي أَبُو يَعْلَى ibn al-Farra'i. And knowing the occasions of a hadith. And some of the sheikhs of al-Qadi Abu Ya'la ibn al-Farra authored works on it. It's important to also know that just like we have for the science of Quran, asbab and nuzul, the same thing exists for hadith. What is asbab and nuzul? Surah, for example, Surah Al-Lahab. Why was it revealed? There's a reason behind it. What was the context? What occurred? Al-Kawthar. What occurred for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send down that surah? Qul huwa Allahu ahad. What occurred? Qul a'udhu bi rabbil falaq and Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas. What was going on? What was the context that Allah revealed the ayat for? Likewise for hadith. We call this asbab al-wurud. Why was this hadith said by the Prophet ﷺ? Why did he say these words? What was occurring? What was the context? He said it for a reason. What's that reason? To know that reason is also important in this field. All right? To get yourself the context of the hadith. And this has also been written in various books. وصنفوا في غالب هذه الأنواع وهي نقل المحض وظاهرة التعريف مستغنية عن التمثيل وحصرها متعسر فلتراجع لها مبسوطاتها والله الموفق والهادي لا إله إلا هو. He said, and they authored works on most of these categories. Yani, everything we've just mentioned in this dars, okay, related to the names and to the kunyas, and to the alqab, and to the ansab, whether he's attributed to a land or to his father or mother, what the context of the hadith is. Every single one of these issues that we just mentioned, there's a book that you can go to learn more about it. The purpose of this text is just to introduce you to each one of these things. It's not to teach you in depth about these things. All right. So Ibn Hajar, he's saying here what? They authored works on most of these categories. And to discuss or to mention examples of each one of them is too difficult, he says. So one should refer to the detailed works. Okay, he's telling you, go to the bigger books if you want to learn more about these. And Allah is the one who grants success and guidance, and there is no deity except Him. Okay, هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. And with this, we have completed Nukhbat al-Fikr. Walhamdulillah. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.